Well, this is the time of year where we get all these countdown lists, and I've been to probably I don't know 30 college football stadiums, maybe more, generally around the southeast, but places like Oklahoma State, Arizona State, wherever Georgia's played, with very few exceptions, I've been there. So I'm most accustomed to teams and schools in the Southeastern Conference, but I've also been to North Carolina, Clemson, Georgia Tech, obviously. Those are all Southeastern schools, but you get my point. Not all in the Southeastern Conference. This is painfully aware from Clemson's lawsuit. And today I saw Joel Klatt, our friend over at Fox, who certainly goes to a lot of stadiums himself because of broadcasting, played at Buffalo. A lot of people call him a Big Ten honk, which I think there's some truth to that. And he had a top 5 list. And I have to tell you, I think he got number 1 right. I don't know how the rest of these make not a lot of sense to me, at least one of them in particular. So let's just go through the list. Number 1, to get it out of the way, well, actually, to get this out of the way, completely didn't involve Georgia in this at all. And I don't care if you don't have Georgia in your top 5. I think that's relative. All these things are relative, but to have some of these over Georgia, it's just not accurate. And I don't know how else to put it. At number 1, he's got LSU. I think LSU is the hardest place to play in the country. I've been there. I've been to everywhere in the SEC. Okay, and we're going to see what Texas is like. I completely anticipate Texas to be difficult, a very challenging place to play. But there's something very different about LSU. And with LSU, it's not abnormal to see grandmas saying some sexually explicit things about the other team. Like, that's LSU. And if you know that and you're used to it, and, players, this is one of the few places that you can actually hear what the crowd says. Like, if they're talking, you could hear it. That's not really the case at a lot of the schools in the SEC. That's the case maybe at Tech a little bit, Georgia Tech. But most places the field is set, not at LSU. Like LSU, the post-game locker room, if you want to call it, the post-game media is a total nightmare. Every part about LSU is very difficult, and it is a very challenging, hostile place to play, period. He's got Penn State at 2. I've not been to Penn State, so I can't say. It's over 100,000 people. They've done a great job with the whiteout. I get the feeling it's overrated, but, that's okay too. He's got Alabama at 3, and a lot of people do not think Alabama is a very good atmosphere. No hate, just completely my take. It is hard. You can't have Alabama at 3 and not have like Tennessee and Georgia at 3A and B. I mean, Alabama is very similar to those places. It's very loud. It's I think they've done a very good job at Alabama which is not surprising. They do a lot of good things, a lot of stuff. But they've, the way they've made the stadium, it's nicer than it was. Everywhere is nicer than it was. Sanford's always really been nice, which I think takes away from it sometimes when people start talking about intimidating, places to play or top 5. If you don't include Georgia in your top 5, though, and you include Alabama, I mean, it's virtually the same experience. I would say, from my time, I've been at Bama for 3 games for Georgia, Bama. And one of those, though, was a COVID game, which was a top 5 game. But in 02 and 07, those were really live crowds. It was a tough place to play. But frankly, it was just like Georgia. It was just like Tennessee. It was like those really huge stadiums in the SEC that are hard to distinguish. I mean, if you did not have the Alabama Crimson Tide playing there, which you do, it would take away from Bryant-Denny. Joel Klatt's got Oregon at 4. I've not been out there. No one has anything bad to say about Oregon ever. It's not a real huge stadium. But it's, at the same time, it's I do think that the size does matter in this case. when it's half the size of like Georgia, Bama, LSU, Tennessee. It just can't be as nuts because there's fewer people, and that adds up. I mean, for context's sake, Oregon is about the size. Well, it's exactly the size. Autzen is exactly the size of Bobby Dodd Market Field, Bobby Dodd Stadium. It's exactly the size of Georgia Tech. So, you'll have to forgive me if I don't know about that. I've been to Ohio State. I think Ohio State is scarier than Oregon. But it's number 5 that I have the biggest issue with. I think there's a lot of great things about Clemson. I think it's a really good atmosphere. It is not better than Tennessee. I'm just going to tell you right now. It's not better than Tennessee. It's just not. So just that alone. Tennessee, if you've ever been to Neyland when it's rocking, there's nothing like that with the exception of LSU, I would say. Why? Because there's 100,000 people there. There's 20,000 fewer people at Clemson. There's, 40,000 fewer people at Oregon. If you don't have Neyland on this list and you've got Clemson and Oregon on here, I just, I can't, it cannot be taken seriously. Okay, now, with that said, I've probably been to 30 games at Clemson. Maybe that's too high. Let's just say I've been to 18 or something like that. When it gets rocking and rolling, it's like everywhere else. I mean, it gets rocking and rolling. But this is recency bias, is what this is. If you were to go down to Doak Campbell in the 90s, Memorial Stadium at Clemson would not be the same. Okay, so a lot of this is recency bias and how good is X team or whatever. I frankly, South Carolina at the beginning of games is as wild as anywhere. But the problem is you got to play the whole 60 minutes, as the Clemson folks know. So I don't, I for a long time did not think that Sanford Stadium was a really tough place to play. And that was more in the 90s than any other time. But in the last 25 years, I would say, it is becoming a very difficult place to play. And the teams are good for sure. But like when you think back to, just LSU 2004, you think back to Auburn 2007, LSU 2013, Notre Dame 2019. Lately, there's not been a lot of tight games with Georgia, but at home. But when you think about, the Tennessee game in 2022. So those were sort of elite atmospheres that you can get that. I can't remember, and my wife goes to, I would say 75% of the Clemson games. I can't remember a time where she's been like, man, I've just never, like, that was wild. So putting Clemson in there would be like putting Ole Miss or something like that. Maybe that's not a great example, or Arkansas. Arkansas is the same basic layout as Clemson. They just aren't as good. And so, unless you're, I will, because I've not been there, I will allow Oregon, but you cannot, as a person who's traveled to a lot of these places, the places that are really underrated, Kentucky is very difficult to play at. I know that sounds strange, but I mean, I think if Ohio State played Kentucky, I would take Kentucky's points. I'll tell you that right now. I think the Swamp is not what it used to be, and that's because of the team. But, in terms of home field, very good Florida at the Swamp. That's hard to deal with. Kyle Field, Texas A&M. That is a wild atmosphere. It's strange. It's weird. It's all of those things. I've not been to Austin, so I can't say, but I'm sure that will be a sort of a, live. Well, when Georgia plays there, if you're not live for when a top 10, top 5 program, is there, then you're just not a good, you're just not good. Like Missouri, whatever. I mean, it's whatever. I mean, but a lot of the schools in the SEC, once you've been to a place where you can't hear, you just can't hear. And like, Oregon, I think the one thing I will say this about Clemson and Oregon, I think as well, and this helps Tennessee, is the way the stadium is structured. That helps a lot. At Georgia, at the Rose Bowl, at Georgia, probably at Michigan, where the stadium goes out more than up, well, that makes a difference with sound. With with Clemson at the top, now not at the bottom, at the top, you'd better have a seatbelt at the top of Williams-Brice. Those are not Williams-Brice is where South Carolina plays. Those are not comfortable seats. Those are not where you want to be sitting. Okay, you need a seatbelt. You might want to get a helmet. Like at Clemson, you might want to like get a vaccine before you go. And really at Columbia for sure, you want to get a tetanus shot. There's a lot of different things to get ready when you're going to travel across the river. But like at North Carolina is really nice. It's like nice. But and Georgia's nice too. And I wonder if that's what takes it away. But Alabama's nice. And it's hard and it's completely objectively. It's hard to say that you've got LSU and Alabama on this list and you don't have Tennessee. Like, I don't think so. And if you're not going to include Georgia in a list where I think they've lost one home game in however many years. Well, and so these lists are so subjective. But I'll just tell you right now, there's no tougher place to play than LSU. There's just not. And that is just a complete subjective fact, if that's even a term. That's a very, very, very difficult place to play, whether LSU is good or not. Okay, I've been there many times. I've been there 3, 8, 18. I'm probably missing one in there. At night, it is even more difficult. Any place at night's tough. I think Penn State does a really good job. They don't play a ton of night games. Penn State is just a huge place. Alabama, for me, Alabama, Georgia are very similar. For me, they're not Tennessee, and I'll just say that, okay? But I've never seen Georgia be the road team in Sanford. So, and now that I say that about Georgia and Alabama, if you don't have Jordan Hare on this list, I have a problem with you. I mean, Clemson is not close to Auburn. In terms of how difficult it is to play there, it's just not. And it may be that, when Georgia plays at Auburn, it's just a rivalry game and all that. But our head is beaten in about how Georgia and Clemson's a rivalry. It's not, but whatever. And, so you're sitting there and you're paying attention to what people are saying. But, Alabama and Georgia have, and I guess LSU, if that's the group that you include, they've won the most national championships from the SEC schools lately. They have a very hard time at Auburn, seemingly every time. Now, not every time, but seemingly every time, or enough to where it's like, why is this so difficult? Auburn is a difficult place to go play. LSU is a very difficult place to play. Tennessee is a very difficult place to play. I would say, from my experience, that those three are more difficult to play at than Alabama. They are certainly more difficult to play at than Clemson. I've never seen Jordan never played, and I've never been to a game at Florida State. I think if it were the 90s, Florida State was rocking and rolling back then. They lost a lot of momentum lately, but this is recency bias with some of this stuff. Clemson has been a really good program these last sort of 6-7 years, but they weren't before that. And it wasn't hard. I mean, and Death Valley, as they call it, it wasn't hard to play there. And people are nice there. It's not like the SEC where, it's not nice. LSU, seriously, I don't want to call a place dangerous, but you'd better be ready. You better be ready to party when you're going down there, because they take it very seriously, and it's tough to win there. But this, if you don't have Tennessee on your list, and you're talking about places to see, difficult places to play. I mean, best home field advantage. Tennessee just isn't good like they used to be. That's all that is. But Sanford Stadium, you can't include this top 5 is wrong, not because it has Clemson, but and Oregon. I'll put them in there too, but because if you've got Alabama at 3 and you don't have Tennessee and Georgia, and I mean just those two specifically, forget Auburn for a second. If you don't have those two, I don't know what to say. I mean, Bryant Denny, shit, they didn't play half their home games there for the last, century. They were playing in Birmingham for their big game. So don't come with the Bryant Denny stuff. I mean, Bryant Denny is a very difficult place to play. But if you're gonna put them, that in there, at least they should respect playing at their home place. And they didn't for such a long time. They played in Birmingham, Iron Bowl, hello, all of it. I don't agree with this.